Hello and welcome to Railroad Journeys Around the World. China, the last stronghold of mainline steam left in the world today. We're witnessing the final sunset of an era. As the substantial remaining numbers of steam locos are literally being overtaken by the more powerful new classes of diesels and electrics, there's never been a better time to examine in detail the vast and largely unknown to most Westerners China rail network. Thanks to a rather clever blend of traditional communism mixed with new Western-style market forces, China's economy is booming. As we shall see, the implications for rail transport are enormous as the expanding network tries to cope with record amounts of both freight and passenger traffic. Many key routes are already stretched to full capacity. Although domestic fares have trebled in recent years in an effort to actually discourage passengers, many trains are still grossly overcrowded. Despite massive investment in both new routes and modern traction, China Rail still needs the services of its remaining mainline steam fleet of around 3,000 locos to cope with the current record traffic levels. While it is undoubtedly the attraction of top-rate mainline steam action like this at Zhongwei that's currently drawing rail fans from all around the world, there's far more to both China Rail and China that's well worth examining. Although it's possible to travel into China by rail from either Hong Kong or Russia, the majority of short-term visitors tend to fly into the capital of Beijing, or as it's still often referred to by many Westerners, Peking. A first visit to China will quickly dispel any preconceptions you may have about the country. China is changing rapidly, and while Chairman Mao may still smile down benevolently in Tiananmen Square, a whole new generation has grown up expecting Western-style consumer goods and fashions. In fact, these days, it's comparatively rare to find heroic statues of Chinese leaders, and it's possible to visit most parts of China without the old-style obligatory cultural tour. Although many foreign visitors do still enjoy a quick visit here or to the famous Forbidden City. To savour the real China doesn't necessarily mean undertaking a lengthy rail journey, as we shall do during the course of this programme to some of the more remote northern regions. Everywhere and every day, the streets of all the big cities and towns are packed with people, mostly shopping, but often happy to enjoy traditional free street theatre like this. The rather quaint street markets that provide the vast majority of fresh food supplies for Chinese consumers may appear long established, but in fact scenes of private enterprise like this, operated by literally thousands of street traders, were not so very long ago illegal. It seems that quite a few of China's huge population of nearly 1.25 billion people now have the money to buy at least some of the things they want. Although there is already a McDonald's in Beijing, fast food generally means something far more traditional, like steamed dumplings or fried bread rolls. The appetizing smells of cooking, blended with plenty of other not nearly so pleasant odors, never seem far away in most big Chinese cities. The freeing of the old-style communist constraints that inhibited the growth of trade have had a tremendous impact throughout the length and breadth of China. The desire to earn enough money to purchase the newly available wares means that all sectors of the Chinese economy, from heavy industry to food production and consumer supplies, are booming. This in turn guarantees more and more business for the ever-expanding rail network. Most big cities like Beijing are already choked with traffic. China does have a few new motorway-style roads, particularly here in Beijing, a huge city of over 9 million people. But at present, the only viable means of large-scale long-distance transport throughout China for people or freight is still rail. Although the vast majority of the goods in the well-stocked shops will have travelled at some stage by rail, it's still more than likely that the final part of the journey will be accomplished using nothing more sophisticated than pedal power, or even more traditional forms of transport. In a society where donkeys, horses and mules are still used extensively for transporting goods, it quickly becomes apparent just how essential to everyday life a well-organised railway network really is. Very much China Rail's new beast of burden is the DF4 East Wind class. All told, there's a staggering total of nearly 4,000 of these powerful 3,590 horsepower locos in service today. The vast majority of the class were built at Dalian diesel works on the Chinese coast, to the southeast of Beijing. Many examples can now be seen at work throughout China, their arrival often precipitating the demise of another regular steam turn. The design, which dates from 1969, is notable in being totally home-produced, although it does show various foreign influences. In particular, the body style looks similar to earlier imported German types. The orange livery worn by some units employed on passenger turns is more than purely cosmetic. It denotes what is officially a subclass of the DF4. In practice, these orange DF4Bs are identical, except that they've been geared for higher speed express passenger work. These locos are capable of a top speed of 120 km an hour, while the green mixed traffic DF4's maximum speed is only slightly less, at 100 km an hour. At first glance, the NY7 with its similar front-end livery could be mistaken for a DF4. In fact, these more powerful machines were built by Henschel in Germany and are based on a similar design originally supplied to Soviet railways. China Rail bought a total of 3 versions of these locos. When this final batch of 20 were delivered in 1972, they were then at just over 5,000 horsepower, the most powerful diesel hydraulic locos in the world. The remaining members of the class still in service, including this earlier NY6, are often seen around Beijing, usually working passenger trains on the difficult Nankou Pass line. Another interesting 70s design still to be seen in regular use is the BJ class, which first took to the rails as long ago as 1975. All told, over 350 of these distinctive diesel hydraulics have been built, and they're often to be seen on passenger duties around Beijing. The BJ stands for Beijing, with all the class being built at the famous February the 7th Loco Works, close to here in the suburbs of Beijing. Even at first glance, the distinctive ND4s look vaguely French in their appearance, which is hardly surprising, as they were built by Alstom in France during 1973 and are based on the French CC 72000 class. China's generous loading gauge means that technical changes to the traction motors from the original French versions could easily be accommodated in a larger body shell. All 50 of the class are based at Fung Tai Shed and are used exclusively on freight traffic, often to the south of Beijing, and more recently on services to Datong. Another French product is the 8K. 150 of these were built by a consortium led by GEC in 1985. The locos formed a crucial part of an important project to link the coalfields around Baotou via a new 630-kilometre electrified route from Datong to the deep-sea export terminals at the port of Qinhuangdao on the Yellow Sea. The original contract provided for 10 of the locomotives to be assembled in China rather than France. The idea was to allow a preliminary transfer of the sophisticated technology involved in their construction, so that further batches could be built by the Chinese to the same design. However, while the bulk of the order was constructed by Alstom at Belfort in eastern France, no additional Chinese batches have ever been built. The electrification project was part of a 10-year program to raise coal carrying capacity to over 600 million tonnes a year, and has involved not only upgrading 12 existing coal routes, but actually constructing 8 more. This particular route, giving yet another direct link to the port of Qinhuangdao, connects with the busy Beijing Fengtai West Yard and was only completed in 1984. Out of a total route mileage of nearly 54,000 kilometres, at present just over 8,000 are electrified. China has extremely large reserves of coal, and at present 70% of the country's energy requirements are met by home-produced coal, so electrification makes good economic sense. With a top speed of 100 kilometers an hour and a maximum output of 8,500 horsepower, these are the most powerful class of locos to be seen in use in China today. Although the design of the present batch of 8Ks is now 10 years old, China Rail are at present tendering for the supply of 48 more of this same class of loco. While the construction of the latest designs of motive power continues unabated throughout China, some 260 kilometres to the northeast of Beijing, George Stephenson would still be able to appreciate the finer points of loco construction here at the Tangshan Loco Works. This is the last place in the world still building standard gauge steam locomotives in any volume. Yet, against all odds, production seems set to continue for some time to come. Currently under assembly is the latest SY type. Already in this first week of the construction cycle, many of the components, including the boiler and the firebox, are easily recognizable. The final stage in the production cycle before painting is an exacting series of steam tests. This is always an exciting moment, as it's literally the first time the loco breathes new life. Back in the 1980s, production peaked at 150 units a year. Today the works are geared up to produce 1 new steam loco a month. Three early orders from American preserved lines placed in 1989 have not been repeated, perhaps due to the vastly increased costs. Or maybe it was the loss of 1 loco en route when the ship sunk that's put off future customers. This particular loco has been ordered by the steelworks at Harbin, where it will join several others already in service. Many hundreds of the class can still be found employed at a wide variety of industrial sites throughout China, but undoubtedly one of the most impressive locations where SYs can be seen hard at work is here at Jiali Nur Open Cast Pit. Situated 30 kilometers to the east of Manzhouli in Inner Mongolia and very close to the border with Russia, a small town has grown up to service Jiali Nur Open Cast Pit. At over 5 kilometres long and almost 2 kilometres wide, the huge open-cast pit represents coal mining on an enormous scale. Not all the locos at Jialai Nor were bought new. Generally speaking, it's the engines with the higher number series that have been brought straight from Tangshan works. Several locos, like this rather work-weary example, which was built in July 1988, still clearly bear their old China Rail logo on the tender. The design of the SY is derived from the American Alco 282s that were exported to Korea. The first variants of the Alco design locos were seen in China during the mid-1930s, when the Japanese occupied much of eastern China and produced their own version, which we now know as the Chinese JF6. Apart from reduced valve travel for industrial use and the sloping tender, the SYs closely resemble the JF6s. It's easy to forget just how restrictive the view from the footplate of a steam locomotive normally is. The characteristic sloping tender used by the majority of SYs does at least give the driver an exceptionally good view when running tender first. This distinctive design feature is not by any means unique and was once shared by many USA yard goats. A very small fraction of the mine's output will not be offered for sale, as it's burned by the locos themselves. What a pity that British Coal couldn't have been persuaded to continue with this economical practice. As each level of the coalface is cut back, the track work has to be moved, so there's plenty of work for this impressive steam crane to help with. It's certainly a refreshing change to find such a large industrial location that still relies entirely on steam motive power and has no immediate plans to introduce any diesel traction. The works at Jialai Nor are only equipped to do light overhauls and servicing. Any heavy overhauls are undertaken here, 1,500 kilometres to the east, at Sugia Tun Depot. To avoid the theft of vital parts on the journey, one of the crews allocated to each SY will travel and stay with their loco while it travels to and goes through the works, eventually, after a period of up to 3 months, returning with the refurbished loco to the pit at Jialai Nor. The selection of locos at Sugia Tun, with many refurbished engines in ex-works condition, is a fitting testament to all the hard work that's gone into their overhaul and rebuild. There's still plenty of mainline steam action to be found around Baotou, some 832 kilometres northwest of Beijing in Inner Mongolia. Climbing steeply into the hills to the north of Baotou is the single-track line to Bayanobo. This route was opened in 1959 and was built to connect the giant steelworks at Baotou with the massive iron ore deposits found at Bayanobo. Most of the ore trains are worked by unassisted QJs. These now represent by far the biggest class of steam loco left in China. All told, a total number of around 4,700 units had been built when production finally ceased in 1987. Nobody really knows just how many QJs are left in active service, but it's probably safe to say there were at least 2,000 still working throughout China during 1994. Traffic levels on this 160-kilometre line vary considerably, but it's not unusual to see a train every 40 minutes or so these days. Not all the steam action around Baotou is confined to QJs. A few freight trains like this also employ the services of one of Baotou's dwindling number of JS or construction class locos. The first production of the deceptively powerful JS class took place from 1957 to 1961, when just over 1,000 examples were built, mainly by Dalian Works. Subsequent batches were also built at several other locations, including Datong Works, which went on to produce the improved JS2 versions, which are numbered from 8001 upwards. These days, most of the JSs in the Baotou area are generally used on lighter duties, including suburban and local passenger services, like this one to Bayanobo. To employ a loco of this size on an all-station stopping train is really something of a waste, as their tractive effort of £49,000 is actually 23% greater than that of a BR9F. The line to Bayanobo only sees one passenger train working each way every day, and generally speaking, passenger numbers are well up to the usual China Rail levels. To see JSs at work on passenger turns is something of a rarity. These days, most of their rapidly dwindling numbers in other parts of China are confined to yard duties or light shunting operations. Looking reminiscent of some latter-day British sheds with a fine collection of locos, cold and ready for duty, Baotou Shed had an allocation of around 50 QJs and 15 JSs. At its peak in the mid-1980s, the shed was host to 260 engines, which then included 30 JF Liberation class locos. Although the exhortations from management to work harder may appear unusual to us, the works chalk notice board does have one or two familiar touches, with announcements about permanent way restrictions and of course safety on site. Attention is also drawn to particular engines that perform best in terms of coal consumption, known as model locos. The depot is organised according to American practice, with the servicing and repair sheds being distinctly separate. In spring 1994, there was still plenty of work for the JS Shed pilot to attend to, even though at that time another brand new batch of DF4s were just about to be commissioned. Loco preparation is carried out across 4 roads to the side of the main shed. All the usual necessities of steam engine maintenance are attended to in this area. Pleasant enough on a spring day, but not much fun when temperatures can drop to 30 degrees centigrade below zero in winter. It makes a refreshing change to see JSs as well as the more familiar QJs being prepared. Baotou steam shed is equipped for all but the heaviest running repairs. So with a total working fleet of around 60 engines, there's always plenty of work on hand. Typical scenes of cannibalisation evident at the east end of the depot, where various parts have been salvaged from scrapped QJs and JSs before they're cut up on site, are very reminiscent of the last few years of British steam, where make, do and mend was also very much the final order of the day. Since our visit in spring 1994, the latest batches of diesels have been commissioned, and sadly, scenes like this at Baotou are no more. The remaining steam fleet is now rapidly being laid aside in favour of diesel. These dramatic changes in working practice mean that all repairs to steam locos at Baotou have now ceased. Travel by rail throughout China is rewarding, but can initially be frustrating for the unprepared traveller. Naturally, the main public timetable only shows station names in Chinese, although these can be traced with a little practice once you know the train number. However, an English version which shows only principal trains can sometimes be obtained. Although it's possible to purchase detailed railway maps in China, they do tend to be difficult to follow. Fortunately, a UK-based company produces this excellent map book and station guide. It lists all locations in pinyin, which is also used on nearly all station signs. For many travellers, their first encounter with China Rail will be here. Beijing Station, which is constructed in a traditional architectural style, is in fact relatively new. It was built in only 11 months with Russian assistance and completed in 1959. If travelling independently, it's possible to purchase tickets from the International Ticket Office, which is tucked away in the corner of this impressive central main entrance hall. In common with most other principal stations, there's also a separate waiting room for foreign travellers. Ticket prices, although reasonable, are in fact inflated by 3 times for foreign customers. Whether you're travelling hard or soft class, there's no bypassing Chinese railway bureaucracy. Even if you're a privileged soft-class ticket holder, it's universal practice in China not to allow passengers onto the platforms until shortly before the train is due to depart. Even then, the allocation of seats may not always be quite as smooth as hoped for. Hard-class travel inevitably involves frantic pushing and shoving, as nearly all passenger services are grossly overcrowded. A typical rail journey from Beijing will normally only allow a brief few minutes to observe station activity. In this case, the orange liveried loco on the left is a passenger DF4B, while the leading loco on our train is a typical mixed traffic DF4 piloting an NY7. Amongst notable locations passed on a journey eastward, a Beijing diesel depot, offering a brief glimpse of a rare pair of blue liveried back-to-back single-ended BJs amongst the ranks of more common classes. It's only a comparatively short distance from the suburbs of Beijing to the Great Wall of China. Each journey offers 2 chances to view the wall, as the train has to retrace its route from nearby Qinlongqiao reversing station. Here, the leading DF4 from the original double-headed pair of locos runs round to couple onto the train before taking it back again through the tunnel. The NY at the rear will act as a banker on the steep 1 in 30 climb up to Bardeling. Eventually it'll drop off at Kangshuang, where it will then wait to return to Beijing with an up train. Number 1862 is a typical example of the ubiquitous DF4 class and was built at Dalian Works. Literally translated, the works plate reads "big and strong," which is rather appropriate for a 2,680 kilowatt machine. Alternative methods of reaching railway locations include using local taxis. The small microvan-style cabs at 1 yuan per kilometre can be very cost-effective indeed if you can fit all your kit into them. Accommodation varies tremendously throughout China. In most of the larger cities, and of course Beijing, you can expect something approaching Western standards at reasonable prices. In the more remote areas, most accommodation tends to be a bit more basic. The rooms here do include private facilities, and the welcome will be warm, even if the water isn't. As you might expect, Chinese cooking doesn't bear very much resemblance to the humble Chinese takeaway. Many dishes tend to be virtually vegetarian, although the actual content varies considerably between the regions. All food will be freshly cooked. One advantage in eating with a group is that there's bound to be at least several dishes that will appeal to most people. Cooking on a coal-fired range in cramped conditions while on the move requires very special skills. Standards in Chinese railway restaurant cars vary enormously. Some have won awards, others are a bit more basic. Generally speaking, the vast majority of our many meals on board, although often fairly simple, were always freshly cooked and very acceptable. The restaurant car is a necessity for passengers and train staff, who also are fed here during and after their shift of duty. China Rail provides two standards of sleeping berths. The so-called hard class has totally open berths piled 3 high. The bunks themselves, if a little restricted in head clearance, are certainly adequate. Travelling in hard class is a great way to meet people. You can never be sure who you're going to be sleeping next to. Lights and the public address system, which often plays Chinese music, are both compulsorily turned off at around 10:30. Of course, there's no restrictions for the 4 occupants who can afford the luxury of travelling soft-class sleeper. It can be a very long night though, if you're really unlucky and have to spend it in hard class standing up. The more modern stock is air-conditioned. This means that the compartment windows can't be opened, and unfortunately the system is also often turned off at the whim of the Dragon Ladies. Hot water is supplied from a samovar at the end of each coach by the coach attendants, and this can be really useful for making hot drinks, provided you remember to take some tea or coffee with you. In soft class, there's one Western-style toilet in each carriage, but convincing the attendant to allow you the privilege of using it can often be rather difficult. One of the few rules that seems to be applied quite strictly is that photography around stations is not usually permitted, so using an open train window makes a very acceptable location. On the journey from Beijing, it's still possible to enjoy the real thrill of regular mainline steam haulage for around 330 kilometres, from here at Shizhuishan, through Zhongwei and on to Gantang. Provided the Dragon Ladies, who are in charge of each passenger coach, don't object, on most journeys there's usually a chance to spend a few minutes exploring at some of the longer stops. Even here in China, travel behind mainline passenger express steam is becoming increasingly rare and is something to be savoured. The scenery that gradually unfolds from the train window varies greatly, from the arid regions around Zhongwei to the densely forested landscapes around Nancha. One thing that it never seems to be, no matter how long the journey, is boring. When the train stops long enough for the Dragon Ladies to do a spot of spring cleaning, it's the signal to get off and stretch your legs. It's seldom that you ever see a Chinese waiting room this empty. Many Chinese are renowned for their love of fireworks, and the sound of firecrackers exploding in the street to celebrate any special event is very common. Unfortunately, as this horrific poster makes only too clear, there have been many serious railway accidents caused by passengers carrying powerful fireworks as hand luggage, despite the fact that transportation of these by rail has always been banned. Far more interesting, though, is the everyday action taking place at the front of our train. Commonplace and routine work like this will soon be little more than memories. The crew servicing our loco includes one young lady. In these more enlightened days, all Chinese school leavers are guaranteed a job which is automatically allocated to them, though it's possible to refuse the officially offered position provided you can find an alternative job. Steam action at Zhongwei on the busy main line to Gantang has frequently been described as providing the greatest show on earth. This is something of a bold claim to live up to, but as we shall see, in terms of sheer spectacle, it's amply justified. In an attempt to gain height, this busy main line traces two giant horseshoe curves as it climbs westwards from the small town of Zhongwei towards the summit, before finally descending to Gantang. After changing locos in the small yard at Zhongwei, double-headed and even occasionally triple-headed locos set out with 2,000 to 3,000 ton freight trains on the start of a grueling climb west. Zhongwei is a military zone, and some restrictions to photography do apply. In particular, visits to the shed at Zhongwei are not permitted. Happily, though, it's recently become possible to obtain photographic permits from the military security police for the rural area between Zhongwei city limits and the summit of the climb. This includes the area here, around Chapoteau, some 18 kilometers outside of Zhongwei, where the 1 in 80 climb starts in earnest. In the summer of 1994, in addition to the majority of freight still being steam-hauled, both stopping and express passenger trains between Zhongwei and Gantang were still steam-hauled on most days. With solid steam action like this every 40 minutes or so, there's certainly no need for stage-managed photo run-pasts. In the distance, the Yellow River winds its way east past the sands of the Tenga Desert. When in flood in this area, the river has caused extensive problems for railway engineers as it cuts away the sandy hillside. Despite the use of specially matted grasses, the line, which is actually built on sand, is potentially very vulnerable. Even today, large-scale landslips are creeping ever closer to this newly doubled section. The area, which is on the edge of the Gobi Desert in Inner Mongolia, is very remote and supports only a few small isolated settlements, where villagers eke out an existence mainly growing rice. Particularly noteworthy is Train 43 from Beijing to Lanzhou, which is booked for steam haulage from Shijuishan. This service once employed Pacific 462s, but these were replaced by QJs when train lengths increased to their present size. Although not really designed for express passenger work, the QJs, generally speaking, turn in a pretty good performance, running at speeds of up to 60 km per hour with a 15-coach train up the long climb at Menjiawan towards Gantang. About two-thirds of the way to the summit, the line has been nearly quadrupled at Changliushu Station. Although only one train a day in each direction stops here, and the nearest village consists of only a few thousand people, the opportunity was taken to provide new, full-length mainline platforms. This particular train also includes 3 of the new flush-sided coaches in the consist that are based on an original East German design. China Rail owns a staggering total of 25,000 passenger carriages, of which 1,500 are restaurant cars and over 4,000 are sleeping cars. All told, the country's 4-coach manufacturing plants have been turning out about 1,500 new coaches each year. Zhongwei itself is a pleasant market town that can be used as a convenient base for exploring the area. Alternatively, for summer use, there's a small unheated hotel at Chapoteau, which cuts down considerably on the time spent travelling by road to the steeper sections of the line. The town is dominated by this impressive 15th century Gao temple, which was built to serve no less than 3 different religions. There's also a large market, which offers everything from basic kitchen utensils to freshly exploded popcorn. All of these exotic spices and the vast majority of the other goods on display here have arrived by rail. Without the railway, the market would be reduced to selling purely local produce. The road out of Zhongwei is at present being upgraded, and some sections are in a very poor state, which does make chasing rather impracticable. Very gradually, and without the help of any sophisticated equipment, each section of the road westwards to Gantang is being tarmacked. This would have very worrying implications for rail traffic in many countries, but here in a state-controlled society, the future still rests firmly with rail, and the programme of upgrading, modernising and building a railway network for the next century continues at an unprecedented rate. One unusual feature that the QJs have inherited from their Russian LV ancestors is a steam-operated device actuated from the cab that alters the geometry of various compensating levers so as to increase the adhesive weight from around 100 to 106 tons. This is achieved by redistributing approximately 3 tons from each of the leading and trailing trucks to the driving wheels. Despite this, wheel spin, particularly at low speeds with heavy loads, is very common. Nearly all of the traffic is wagon load, and apart from coal trains, it's unusual to see Western-style block workings. Most of the explosion in traffic volume levels in this area during recent years is due to the buoyant state of the Chinese economy at present. But the line here was doubled very much with an eye to the future, when it's hoped that the completion of another link with Russia via Urumqi to the far west will produce extra oil traffic from that area and also more exports to Russia. On most days, at least 1 or 2 freights, often including refrigerated vans, are triple-headed westwards. These express freights tend not to stop at Changliushu for fire cleaning and water, and normally work straight through to Gantang. Several of the QJs based at Zhongwei, like the second loco in this pair, number 6545, a -1 smoke deflector. The business of building the QJ class was originally spread amongst a total of 6 different Chinese workshops. In the 5 years from 1956 to 1961, they constructed a total of 42 slightly different prototypes. Most of the modifications were introduced to help improve performance with the lower grade of Chinese coal. The middle section of the line near to Menjiawang, with its spectacular double horseshoe curves, has quite rightly earned the reputation as being one of China's classic hotspots. From here it's possible to hear and see the trains many kilometers further down the grade before they eventually blast their way past you. We do hope that you've enjoyed this look at the unique railroads of this fascinating country. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to Railroad Journeys Around the World. China, the last stronghold of mainline steam left in the world today. We're witnessing the final sunset of an era. As the substantial remaining numbers of steam locos are literally being overtaken by the more powerful new classes of diesels and electrics, there's never been a better time to examine in detail the vast and largely unknown to most Westerners China rail network. Thanks to a rather clever blend of traditional communism mixed with new Western-style market forces, China's economy is booming. As we shall see, the implications for rail transport are enormous as the expanding network tries to cope with record amounts of both freight and passenger traffic. Many key routes are already stretched to full capacity. Although domestic fares have trebled in recent years in an effort to actually discourage passengers, many trains are still grossly overcrowded. Despite massive investment in both new routes and modern traction, China Rail still needs the services of its remaining mainline steam fleet of around 3,000 locos to cope with the current record traffic levels. While it is undoubtedly the attraction of top-rate mainline steam action like this at Zhongwei that's currently drawing rail fans from all around the world, there's far more to both China Rail and China that's well worth examining. Although it's possible to travel into China by rail from either Hong Kong or Russia, the majority of short-term visitors tend to fly into the capital of Beijing, or as it's still often referred to by many Westerners, Peking. A first visit to China will quickly dispel any preconceptions you may have about the country. China is changing rapidly, and while Chairman Mao may still smile down benevolently in Tiananmen Square, a whole new generation has grown up expecting Western-style consumer goods and fashions. In fact, these days, it's comparatively rare to find heroic statues of Chinese leaders, and it's possible to visit most parts of China without the old-style obligatory cultural tour. Although many foreign visitors do still enjoy a quick visit here or to the famous Forbidden City. To savour the real China doesn't necessarily mean undertaking a lengthy rail journey, as we shall do during the course of this programme to some of the more remote northern regions. Everywhere and every day, the streets of all the big cities and towns are packed with people, mostly shopping, but often happy to enjoy traditional free street theatre like this. The rather quaint street markets that provide the vast majority of fresh food supplies for Chinese consumers may appear long established, but in fact scenes of private enterprise like this, operated by literally thousands of street traders, were not so very long ago illegal. It seems that quite a few of China's huge population of nearly 1.25 billion people now have the money to buy at least some of the things they want. Although there is already a McDonald's in Beijing, fast food generally means something